Recently, we sat down with Chimere Scott, artist and entertainer based in Atlanta, Georgia, who's also the CEO of Southern Chocolate Entertainment. Let's listen to part 5 of our interview.
That's a good question. I can honestly sit here before you today and say that I had a complex as a young girl about my skin complexion. My mother was a lighter skinned woman. My big sister is a light skinned woman. And I was the dark skinned child. So the two main figures in my household, the female figures that I looked up to, their complexion wasn't like mine. And then growing up in that time, if you can relate to this, or any of you darker skinned women can relate, I remember being in about the second or third grade. I mean, and this is young, second, third grade. And there was this little girl. And the funny thing is, this little girl was probably darker than I was, but she teased me. She would call me Blackie. She would, say things like charcoal, and I mean, she would dig in, but I now realize that she did that out of her own insecurity. I mean, this girl was literally darker skinned than I was. And at the time, I couldn't put the pieces together. And when she said it resonated with me. So I honestly grew up having a complex about my complexion. I felt like, I wished I was lighter at times. My mother's side of the family is a little bit more fair-skinned than my father's side, and I get my complexion from my father's side. So I grew up with these insecurities about being a dark-skinned little girl. And it didn't just come from the girl at school. It didn't just come from, my family and me being a darker tone for my family, but it came from the world. It came from the entertainment culture. It came from those things and those images, that American culture put out there and has been putting out for years to make us think and believe that fair skin is better than dark skin. So I dealt with that. As a young girl. So as I grew up and, got into high school and things like that, and started to grow from beyond my big sister's, not her shadow, because she never projected it on me, but it was just my own insecurity. I began to come into a space that was an independent space. I began to find an independent space because eventually the group broke up. My sister decided she didn't want to sing anymore, but I kept going. It was my thing. It was what I wanted to do. So I became a solo artist. I began to do photo shoots, and I began to live in this space where it was just me. It was just my image, and I had to work with what I had. And I began to take these pictures, and I began to see those images back to me. And my mind started to change about how I looked. My mind started to change about the complexion of my skin. I used to start getting these compliments and these references to chocolate. Like, what's up, chocolate? Hey, chocolate. I like that chocolate. And this would come from from peers. This would even come from cousins who would kind of encourage me in that space. I had these beautiful cousins, I remember, that I grew up with, these sisters. It was like about 6 or 7 girls. And they were all chocolate complected women. And I remember looking up to them and thinking like they were just dope. They were just so dope and just so beautiful. Their last name was Brown, ironically, and we called them the Brown Girls. And I found my identity there. And I began to feel different about my complexion. And then when I became this solo artist, I began to own it. It just a light went off for me. I just saw myself in a different light. And as I was maturing and growing into womanhood, and I just started to own everything about this dark brown hue that I have, to the point where I got a contract on the table, and it was time for me to choose a name for my publishing company. And I looked at all the other names that publishers or artists who were now having publishing companies, and I would look at all these other names, and there were these fun, kind of quirky names and things like that kind of represent their artistry or who they were. And my lawyer told me, he was like, okay, we need a name, Chimere. We need a name. We got to establish this company. And I thought about it, and I was like, what represents me? I thought about it. What could I use, or what could I say that I feel like represents me? And that's where the name Southern Chocolate came from. I was a Southern chocolate girl out here trying to make her way in the entertainment industry. So at that moment, I feel like that's when I really owned it. Owned it so much that I named my company that. And from there, I just began to thrive in it. And let me tell you, at this point in my life, I wouldn't change this shade for nothing. I love everything about it. It's so much. It says so much. It speaks volumes. It represents so much. You know, we get compared to all of these different things, right? So I took it. I owned it. I said, you know what? If I compare myself to anything, it's chocolate. You know why? Because chocolate is sweet. Everybody loves chocolate. Chocolate is decadent. People indulge in chocolate, right? So I felt it gave me this certain level of confidence and ownership that I needed. And I wanted to represent something, and something that represented me. And that's how the name Southern Chocolate Inc., now Southern Chocolate Entertainment, came into play. See, I provide decadent entertainment for your indulgence.
Oh no. Preacher is preaching, good God, the things that he preaches. I wonder who taught him to preach. Teacher is teaching, where did he get his degree? Now it is no mystery, who taught us